Hey everyone, Stacks here. Welcome to the channel. Today I am checking out X-Force number 3, written by Benjamin Percy. Joshua Cassara is your artist, Guru Effects, your color artist, and then you have Dustin Weaver and Edgar Delgado that did this X-Force number 3 cover. But enough with initial introductions, let's jump right into this book. And this book starts very much with a horror vibe, going through what Domino experienced when she was captured by this group. And while Domino is sitting there, this creep is giving this monologue saying, we, us humans, recognize our limitations and then invent remedies, telescopes and microscopes, compensate for the weakness of eyes, hammers and saws for the softness of hands, boots and skis allow feet to explore rocks and snow and water, drugs shield and purify the body, and you, dear Domino, you are a walking skeleton key that will help us pick the lock of evolution. And you can see where they're taking the skin off of Domino and they're grafting it onto these assassins that they're building, that they're manipulating down. They're basically tearing them down to nothing and rebuilding them to fight mutants. That, of course, was then. Now we jump to the current time where Wolverine and Kid Omega are outside of Seoul in this facility where these monsters were developed. And after turning all these walking monsters into a bunch of corpses, that's when Wolverine starts discussing the finer points of Krakoan law, stating that, you know, I don't think it applies if it was mutant lab-built hamburger like these guys, right? And Kid Omega rebuffs him and tells him that law is exactly why Krakoa will never work. Professor X has always been too kind, too generous, too optimistic about the protozoic slime that is humanity. And now look at what they've done. Look what they've done to Domino. And Wolverine looks up at her, his claws out, sitting there, just having gone and just ripped through all of these monsters, and tells him, yo, you're smart, kid. That don't mean you know everything. And Kid Omega loses it on him a little bit. Like, what are you talking about? Doesn't this make you angry? They're using Domino as a platform for bioprinting. She's been absolutely butchered. And Wolverine agrees with him. He's like, look, it makes me mad, but trust me, the professor knows exactly what humans are capable. The same as mutants. The very best. And Domino looks up at him, gasping for air. And then Wolverine, and the very worst. And then suddenly something busts through the building. And this is where the preview I published a couple days ago, where it stopped. And everybody was kind of guessing that this was either a Sentinel or Apocalypse. Well, it's not. Instead, it's some type of giant manufactured human monster with no skin thing, just like all the rest of these dudes that have been manufactured to be assassins. This one just happens to be a giant, apparently. It definitely feels at this moment that that's like the final boss for the stage, you know what I mean? So while those guys are trying to escape and deal with Big Naked, you have Jean Grey and Beast, who are back on Krakoa, who are going to try to resurrect Professor X. And the discussion between Henry McCoy and Jean Grey is actually pretty interesting. It's pretty philosophical in that they're talking about, you know, what is this resurrection protocol going to mean? Are we no longer going to fear death? Is death no longer going to have a meaning to us? And should we no longer fear it, or is it right for us to fear death? And this goes a lot into Christian doctrine. This goes into a lot of doctrine where, and this is Jean Grey's who's talking about this, talking about how she's died more times than anybody, and basically the lack of fear of death. Once you can get past the fear of death, things like being courageous, being a hero, all those things, they're more prevalent. Because once you start living beyond yourself and you start thinking about others, you become a better person. It's this lack of selfishness, this living beyond yourself, living for others, living for us as a whole. And that's kind of what she comes to with her explanation of what she thinks of death now. It allows them to focus on the bigger picture rather than their own selfish desires. And because of all this, they can focus on the long game of mutant kind and the dream of Krakoa and how it's their job to protect it. And the whole time while she's discussing this, she's going through the process with Cerebro to bring back Professor X to animate the husk, to reprogram him with his memories. And as she's doing this, the hand just burst out of the egg sac. From there, we jump back to Seoul, where the three, Wolverine, Domino, and Kid Omega, are still running from the giant naked monster. And that's when Domino points out, or Kid Omega is trying to use his psychic ability to bring in like something to help stop this thing. Well, it's not working because, as Domino points out, she has a power dampener on her neck. Once Wolverine cuts that thing off, Kid Omega immediately summons like a psychic RPG and puts it right in this thing's face, blows its jaw off and everything. From there, we jump back to Krakoa, where we're with the fifth assassin, the one that Wolverine allowed to live, but just barely. Healer and Sage are continuing to talk about how important it is that this guy lives so they can get information from him, because he's the sole survivor of this group of assassins that attacked and took out Charles Xavier, and they really have no other leads beyond this guy, other than what they find out from Domino or whatever they find at this facility they're at. Well, just as you get the lowdown on how important it is that this guy lives, somebody sneaks into the facility after Sage and Healer leave, places a hand over this guy's mouth and suffocates him right there in the middle of the infirmary, or in the middle of the healing gardens. And there's a white page that discusses this further. It talks about nobody actually even suspected anything, because they just assumed he succumbed to his injuries because he was barely holding on as it was. You also find out that after he was dead, they planned on breaking him down to the cellular level and DNA to look at him and see what everything they had modified, to see if they could find a thumbprint basically as to who did this. And unfortunately, apparently the spinal column is laced with explosives, and when this guy died, it set off some kind of reaction and all the bodies exploded. From there, we jump to New York, where Black Tom Cassidy and Magneto has stepped through a portal, and they are about to address a number of individuals that have gathered outside of the portal, the press and everything else, regarding the current status of Professor Xavier and the attempt on his life. And it's very clear here that Black Tom Cassidy is shouldering the responsibility. He is taking responsibility personally for the death of Charles Xavier back in X-Force #1. The attack, the assassins, all of it, he blames himself. So he sits there and tells Magneto before he passes through to go address the press, basically, that you better go do something before I do something, like strangle them with a bunch of vines and poke sticks through their eyes. And with that, Magneto walks through the portal and is immediately assaulted with this question after question. Is Charles Xavier dead? Was Cerebro destroyed? Does this mean Krakoa, and what does it mean for Krakoa and the mutant nation? And are the treaties, do they still stand? And he just crosses his arms. And when he's standing there and he's about to say something, suddenly there's a voice from behind him that says, "It's all right. You don't need to say anything." And Charles Xavier steps up right beside him, looks over at him and says, "I can speak for myself, old friend." And in that moment, the crowd, the media there just goes nuts. And they start asking questions. Well, how do we really know it was you? And he kind of points out, how do you know it was me on the front end? Why do you suspect something happened? And he never answers the questions directly, but he eventually tells them, to know that this treaty is going to work, you have to trust that I will always be there for you. Once Charles finishes there, he heads back to Krakoa. This is obviously sometime later. Domino's healed up, and he walks in behind a waterfall to where no one else can listen in on him. And he says, "I was hoping we were beyond this, honestly. But they, whoever they are, operating from the shadows, we must respond in kind. They're studying us, and we're studying them. And we know that they're bioengineering themselves into weapons using science to give them what nature won't. And now you followed your scent and spilled their blood like hunters." The left hand turns a page, the right hand makes a fist. That feels right to me. That feels like a force of good. To me, my X-Force. And then another dialogue starts, saying, "Xavier's back, and he pursues us, I'm told. And this isn't the time to go quiet. This is the time to get loud. We'll funnel money into xenophobic gangs churches, think tanks. We'll build an army of dummy accounts and other chat groups online. We'll create every disruption, every dissonance. And of course, we'll continue to hunt down mutants for our experiments. Every country has a shadow agency, Weapon X among them. Xavier made certain each of those was defunded and disbanded. But just as the mutants have come together in Krakoa, the shadows have gathered here, and where shadows gather, there is darkness. We are one and we are many. We are Xeno or Xeno, depending on how you pronounce it. Worth noting that when you decode the cipher, that's actually the name for the next book in the series, Xeno or Xeno. And that's it for X-Force number 3. Now, I enjoyed the issue, obviously. I've been really enjoying X-Force. It's by far my favorite series so far. There were a few things I have questions about in this issue. First of all, how do you genetically engineer a giant dude? Is there like somebody swiping pin particles? What's going on with that? I already talked about how I like Jean's speech about how being beyond the fear of death and being able to give yourself more fully and to basically work for the greater cause because of your ability to look beyond death. I really like that speech. I liked the interaction between Kid Omega, Domino, and Wolverine in this one. You know, Kid Omega is still outraged. Wolverine is still calm and collected, saying, no, there's still some good in humanity. There's also a white page I didn't show that is, once again, it's a scene that would have been awesome if it were in a book, but it talks about the Cerebro the Cerebro sword that Magneto crafted after Professor X's death. And it talks about how when Xavier returned from Krakoa with the others, you know, everybody greeted him, but Magneto presented him with the Cerebro sword and told him, I suggest you keep this close. And Xavier listened to him, and he took it to his quarters, and he hung it right above his bed, right above his pillow, essentially, with the blade pointed down. And it serves as a reminder to him, he says, that he's never been a sound sleeper, but even less now, because a man at war cannot be a man at peace. And it also says that even though Cerebro was broken, it's been forged anew and refined, just like Xavier's dream. And I thought that was a really, really cool quote. But once again, this goes back to, we have a white page, and I've enjoyed some of the white pages. Some of the data dumps on there, the graphs and charts, I think those are really cool. But a scene like this would be really cool. This would be a really cool visual to see this, to see the monologue, the internal dialogue for Xavier with him placing the sword above his bed. I mean, this would be cool. I wish they would take some of these white pages and do another release of the book almost, and have these fleshed out in them, because there's some beautiful thoughts there that an artist could take and make a really cool scene with this. I mean, I hope some small artists and people who can actually draw are looking at this stuff and taking advantage of it, drawing it, and then submitting it, man. If you know anybody that is taking these and doing that, let me know down in the comments, because I would love to see them and hype them. So at the end of this, Professor X finally brought together the X-Force. He is saying, look, I need this clandestine group. I need a group that can go out and fight fire with fire, fight this shadow group that is raising up, calling itself Xeno, and basically hunt them, spill blood like hunters. So with all that being said, this book has all the potential to get even more exciting going forward. Well, guys, that's it for this one. New Mutants and Fallen Angels also came out today, along with the Annihilation Scourge titles, which I've read the Silver Surfer one already and absolutely loved it. If you haven't checked out my Silver Surfer Black videos, I recommend you go do that, because it ties in to that. It's the back end of that, how he became the Silver Surfer in black, basically. I would say biggest question walking out of this, who killed assassin number 5? Who was the one that walked in there, placed his hand over his mouth, and suffocated this assassin before they could get any information off of him? Y'all tell me what you think down in the comments. That's a pretty big looking feller. I mean, any money on Colossus on this one? Y'all tell me what you think down below. Well, hey, it's at that point, guys, where I ask you, hey, if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button. I sincerely appreciate if you do. The channel continues growing, and I am just absolutely ecstatic for it. For all the people that are sharing the videos, liking the videos, leaving comments, guys, thank you so much. Please continue to do so. I sincerely appreciate you. I hope everybody has a great week, and that's all I got. Real Comic Stacks out.